So Shabbat Shalom. Israel has a long and storied history at the zany, colourful international song competition known as Eurovision. After their first appearance in 1973, Israel actually won twice in a row, in 1978 and 79, with Ishar Cohen and the Alpha Betas Abba Nabi, and then Milk and Honey's Hallelujah. You probably know these songs, grew up with them at Hebrew school and so on. Israel would win a third time in 1998 with Dana International's Diva, and their fourth most recent time in 2018 with Netta Barzilai's Toy. Coincidentally, when I was in my year in Israel for rabbinical school, it was a lot of fun. Other notable moments include Israel's declining to host in 1980 because, despite having been the victors and therefore entitled to host, the date coincided with Yom HaZikaron. And later, we had Ofra Haza's performance of Chai, or Alive, in Germany in 1983. This was an extraordinarily poignant statement for an Israeli Jew to be singing in Hebrew in Munich, 11 years after the massacre of several Israeli athletes at the Olympic Games held there. Then there was Eden. I don't think any of us could envy the 20-year-old Eden Golan, Israel's contestant for this year, as she took to the world stage, literally and figuratively, this past Saturday evening, the representative of her torn country 7 months after October 7. Her song, Hurricane, was initially entitled October Rain, with chunks and pieces of the original wording massaged to be more politically palatable. Whilst that's not entirely what I want to focus on tonight, I do want to begin by highlighting a few edits to the song. So verse 1, the first verse, which Eden sang as follows, went, "Writer of my symphony, play with me, look into my eyes and see, people walk away but never say goodbye." This was originally, "Those that write history, stand with me, look into my eyes and see, people go away but never say goodbye." A later verse, which goes as Eden sang it, "Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm, I've got nothing to hide, take it all and leave the world behind. Promise me you'll hold me again, I'm still broken from this hurricane." And we can listen to the original, "Dancing in the storm, we got nothing to hide, take me home and leave the world behind, and I promise you that never again I'm still wet from this October rain." And the outro, these few gentle lines in Hebrew which Eden sang were, "Lo tzarich milim gedolot, no need for big words, rak tfilot, only prayers, afilu im kasher liot, even if it's hard to see, tamid ata mashir li or echad katan, you always leave a little light on for me." And this was originally, "Lo nisha avir linshom, there's no air remaining to breathe, ein makom, no space, ein oti miyom liyom, I'm not myself from day to day, kulam yeladim tovim echad echad, each of them is a good child, every one." So we can hear those differences, both subtle and dramatic. So whilst I'm dumbfounded by the fact that a young Israeli woman wasn't allowed to sing more outrightly about the worst massacre that her country has faced in its history, I'm leaning into curiosity, and was more so struck that when we look a little bit closer, there's something almost midrashic about what Eden and her songwriters were able to achieve. That's because, and bear with me, our rabbis often pull off a similar feat. They start by talking about one thing, an idea, a verse, a phrase, and use a litany of literary devices to ultimately say what they want to say. So let's take an apt example from Breshit Midrash Rabbah that I taught earlier this week, and you'll see why it might be fitting. So it starts with Rabbi Hoshaya the Great commenting on this verse from Proverbs. Ve'ehiyeh etzlo amon, ve'ehiyeh sha'ashuim yom yom v'gomer. I, referring to Torah, will be wisdom personified, and I will be to God as an amon, a delight, day after day. I'll be the source of wisdom, this source of delight. The rabbis pick up on this word amon and explain that it can be interpreted with many meanings. As a caretaker, something that is hidden or covered, it can mean greatness and, of course, most appropriately, an artisan. This amon then, this source of wisdom, the Torah, is then likened to being God's blueprint for creation. The rabbis paint this beautiful picture of a king of flesh and blood, melech basar v'dam, who builds a palace. And this king does not build it by themselves, but rather by the hands of an artisan. And when the artisan builds the palace, they too do not build it by themselves, but rather based on the sheets, the tablets, the knowledge of its design and construction, the blueprint. Now the rabbis get to the point that they really want to make. That so too does God look at this source, the Torah, and fashion the world. Therefore, Breshit bara Elohim, the end of this passage. In the beginning, God created. That original, very first phrase of creation. So now that we can look underneath these words and understand three things. One, the rabbis actually want to address the phrase, Breshit bara Elohim. They're intrigued by it. And two, their direct inquiry is specifically into the word Reshit. And this understanding leads to their conclusion that Reshit is nothing more and nothing less than Torah. Yet, as we've heard, the rabbis illustrate this understanding in their classically convoluted way, by starting with one text in order to wind their way to the text they're truly talking about, and by using wordplay and bringing in other verses from other parts of Tanakh. To the rabbis, each crown and each letter all have a hidden meaning anyway. To the rabbis, everything in Torah is amon in all senses of the word. To play the rabbinic game is to start at point B to get to point A. Put differently, there may be, a little comfort in knowing that this endeavor, whether willingly undertaken or not, is in fact an ancient, very Jewish one. These mental gymnastics, I will admit, are what I admired about Eden's performance this past Motzei Shabbat. Forget that she's only 20 years old, forget that her country's at war, forget that she was confined to her hotel room due to the security threats against her, forget that she had to rehearse whilst literally being yelled and booed at so that she'd learn to cope with the distraction. Forget that, again, because of security at the biggest moment of her young life and young career, her family couldn't travel to be with her. Forget that it was all because, as the saying goes, necessity is the mother of invention, of creation. What I admired in the end was her subtlety, her and her team's way of taking those original lyrics and still finding a way to make their point and say what they wanted to say. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride. I'm still broken from this hurricane. Hamevin yavin, those who know will know, those who understand will understand, and those who watched a little closer will also see that the performance was dedicated to the victims and survivors of the Nova Festival, 3 of whose bodies were recovered earlier today. There is a certain strength then, a certain bravery in being able to make your statement clearly but delicately amidst the circumstances and controversy. The fact that Eden was able to balance this fine line is worth celebrating in and of itself. Moreover, in having marked Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom HaZikaron this previous Monday evening, it felt more important than ever that as a people who, in the words of the psalmist, sow in tears and reap in joy, We're allowed that temporary suspension of disbelief, a reprieve from the heaviness, a small taste of normalcy. Through the many, many tears of the last 7 months, this week of all weeks, Israelis and Jews everywhere needed just one day to celebrate, just one moment to revel, to be unapologetic, to be proud. Despite placing 5th overall, this is what Eden was able to accomplish and what made her a winner, in being that Amon for Am Yisrael and making a little magic happen. When well-known Israeli writer Yossi Klein Halevi visited Toronto this past week, he taught a special session for the Toronto Board of Rabbis. His first time abroad since October 7, he candidly and wistfully lamented that, like that famous scene from the movie Love Actually, he used to believe that Ben Gurion Airport was the happiest place in the world, with travelers delighted to be leaving home and equally happy to return to. Perhaps his theory is true if a video circulating on social media of Eden Golan arriving back in the terminal is anything to go by. She pushes her cart down the walkway, exits the door into the greeting hall, sees her family there and runs into her mother's arms, all of them weeping as the crowd cheers. Eden, Eden, Eden. No more booze. No more yelling, no more subtlety. So as we conclude, perhaps what we can say is, Toda Rabah, thank you, Eden. Thank you for being Amon, a delight, when delight meant being wise, being creative, being grand, beyond your years, despite the enormous efforts for you to be hidden. Thank you for giving us some air to breathe, a gasp of hope and joy when we so desperately needed it. Thank you for being a light when it must have been so hard to see. Shabbat Shalom.